Alrighty, you guys, welcome on back. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to be diving into Eddington, which not our usual shtick around here. Usually we rely on like horror and whatnot, but this is by Ari Aster, and he's one of my favorite, more contemporary directors alongside Eggers. I would say it's those two mainly. Guillermo del Toro too. I gotta throw him in there now. But yeah, it's. I wanted to talk about this one because I think it will open up a interesting conversation, and I think it takes a certain mentality to view this movie. The first time that I went into it, I found myself questioning, I guess, like what's Aster's motive for doing this. And I think the more that we remove ourselves out of it and remove that kind of thinking, I think we can just appreciate it for the absurdist comedy that it is. And it is classified as a Western, it's classified as comedy, more specifically absurdity. So I think if we keep that in mind, it's a relatively good movie. I enjoyed it. I like just about anything that Aster has done, so I might be a bit of an apologist here, but I do enjoy this movie. It just took me a little bit to like kind of fully understand it. But yeah, we'll get into it. So directed and written by Ari Aster and produced. It was produced and distributed by A24, so you know it's going to be good. Aster does everything with A24, I believe, so they work well together. The budget was $25 million, and the box office was $11.3 million. So financially, this would be considered not a success. However, I don't know. I feel like this is a movie that might be appreciated more down the road, maybe. I think if this were to come out in like 2022, 2023, closer to the events of 2020, I don't think it would land too well. And I'm still considering like asking myself, is it too soon? Diving on in. During the COVID-19 pandemic, a standoff between a small town sheriff and mayor sparks a powder keg as neighbor is pitted against neighbor in Eddington, New Mexico. Joaquin Phoenix plays Joe Cross. Pedro Pascal plays Ted Garcia. Emma Stone is Louise Cross. Austin Butler is Vernon Jefferson. Luke Grimes plays Guy. William Bellow is Officer Butterfly. Jimenez. Michael Ward plays Michael.
Michael, you should be with us. Come on.
Emily Hofferl plays Sarah. Deidre O'Connell is Dawn. So, yeah, I have basic synopsis. I also have a bunch of notes that I took, so we're just going to kind of break down the movie as we go. It's Ari Aster, so everything is intentional. Everything's for a reason. And I feel like we could really get, like, kind of grogged down by all the details and little symbolic things in this movie. However, we're going to stick to like main premise. Yeah. But I really, really love the characters in this movie. I think they're all really complicated. They're all hypocrites, which kind of love. It's very real. I do kind of like find myself identifying with the character of Louise. I don't think she's necessarily portrayed in the best light. However, I think that light is cast on her because of her relation to Joaquin Phoenix's character. Because we see once she gets out of that, she's a lot happier. I don't know. I found myself really connecting to her character, her struggles, and just kind of like her emotional fatigue throughout most of this. Like, there's such a contrast between the life she wants to live or the life she's trying to run away from and the life that's kind of being handed to her. In late May of 2020, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, Mayor Ted Garcia of Eddington, New Mexico, implements a lockdown and enforces mask mandates based on the governor's orders at the state level. Local Sheriff Joe Cross disapproves, arguing the mandates violates freedom of choice. And in the opening scene, we see a homeless man just kind of ranting to himself.
Perfection! You won't believe me, because I asked you to help, yes, but you're in your box. The little precious box, your little box of mud.
It really gave kind of like, do you know the the intro to the show Weeds? Ticky tacky little boxes. Like that's kind of the energy, mocking the mundanity of the life of Eddington, mocking the complicity of their lives, I think.
More wicked boxes. And I know who set them here.
And before we're introduced to Mayor Ted Garcia, we are introduced to Sheriff Joe Cross, played by Joaquin Phoenix. And he's watching a video in his car about one partner not wanting a child and how to have that conversation. So we know, like, there's some contrasting beliefs, I guess, in his relationship.
What happens if you are ready to have a baby, but your partner, your spouse, your significant other is not ready to have a baby?
And he is on native land.
That is Severe County.
That may be, but the border is there.
And I do think that is a very interesting part of this movie, is this separation that we see. I'm not sure if that is politically motivated by everything that happened in 2020, or if it probably is. It probably is, because we also saw like the pipeline protests and whatnot those years. So there's a good possibility, but I also think just the location of it being New Mexico adds to that. But maybe that's why Astor chose it. And they pull up and try to enforce mask wearing, even though he's alone in his car. And one of the cops has his nose pulled out. It's subtle, the absurdist humor in this, even though sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's really hit you over the head, and others it's you just have to find the little slivers of hypocrisy that every single character portrays. And I think the absurdity is in that. All of these characters think they are taking a moral high ground or some kind of politically right stance on these issues, but then we see all of them have hypocrisy within that. And I don't think that makes anyone a bad character. I mean, Joe Cross, I would say he's kind of undeniably a bad character, as well as Ted Garcia. I think we see those with more power tend to be the more corrupted. And we see other individuals that, like, say they stand up for corruption, but as soon as they are handed some of that power, they bend at the knees. And then Sheriff Cross gets called in on a disturbance outside of a bar, and we see it's the homeless man from before who's trying to, like, break his way in, essentially. The sheriff ignores two kids smoking weed.
What's that smell, by the way?
Oh, your ass.
I thought the kids' conversation about allyship, again mentioning masks, but the performance as well. I think all of these characters are performing for whoever it is that they want to impress, you know?
Bomb bitches named Sarah think that Rosa Parks.
If I added her on Snap, what would I say?
Take a pic of you with me. Prove that you're an ally.
I think Joe Cross performs for Ted Garcia as well as just his constituents. I think Luis performs for her mom. Ted Garcia performs for his constituents as well for the bid to power. It's a very interesting world, this little town. And I found that these first few scenes really enforce the absurdity. I think there are certain times throughout this where I caught myself being like, is this supposed to be mocking the absurdity of the situation or the situation itself? And I think if you pay close enough attention, you can see it's mocking the situation, not, or maybe not even the situation, maybe more so how people respond to the situation. But when the homeless man finally breaks in and they're screaming like,
He's coughing!
there's some really funny stuff in this movie. I also found the conversation that Joe Cross and Ted Garcia are having through the bar window to be really interesting, kind of like a dueling whose responsibility is it to keep the town safe.
These are your streets.
No, they're
that
your
you locked
streets,
down.
Sheriff. They're your streets to keep safe. And where is your man?
When like, hello, it's the both of yours. Joe lives with his emotionally unstable wife, Louise, and her conspiracy theorist mother, Dawn. And we see that as he comes home, you hear what sounds kind of like Fox News, kind of like media playing in the background.
He's the first city in the world outside of China to have someone get the virus.
And this also extends to his girlfriend, who we see kind of slipping into more esoteric conspiracy theories. Like, it obviously mother to daughter, that extension of mentality, but we also see there's such a strong divide between the two. And I'm wondering if, because we kind of later find out why Louise believes the things she does, why she follows the things that she does, and it's rooted in trauma. So I wonder if the mother has relatable trauma to that as well. I don't know. Or we see the mother is a addition to Louise's trauma throughout the film. We see a memorial to her husband as she is just going on and on about him. I will say this movie, like any other Astor film, is beautifully shot. I think the architecture of these New Mexico homes really plays into a cozy yet distant life. I'm not sure. We see that Louise is very kind of aloof. She creates art and she focuses on her art making. And he's supportive, but it doesn't seem that intellectually. I'm a little hesitant to use that word, but he's not able to hold a conversation about what this art means to him or even means to Louise. And we do see that once Austin Butler's character comes in. Even though we're highly skeptical of this guy, he's able to give her the validation that she needs. And I think that also plays into how cults or those, kind of commune style, how those kind of prey inherently on not weak people, but people who have been through a lot and just want that sense of community. There's also a scene in a grocery mart where, again, they're reinforcing masks.
If a healthy person with a mask...
No, here we go.
The conversation of like this divide between state government versus local kind of continues. We see that Joe Cross doesn't see Ted Garcia as like one of them. The interesting kind of perspective of, well, Joe Cross being a sheriff of the town, he technically isn't part of the us against them narrative either. He's within them as well. And I think as we see Joe Cross's character continue, we do see him kind of break down his morals, or we see what his morals really are. He says he does things in the name of what's right, what's good, but then it does seem to all just be a bid for power. But I also think there's a scene right in the beginning that kind of shoots Cross's credibility, which I think was needed. We see him starting to go live in his car.
I do find it very difficult to breathe in these masks.
Like on Instagram or Facebook, whatever, and just ranting about COVID and how it isn't in the town. From that moment on, you kind of question, like, how credible can we see him? Because it seems like he allows his emotional investment into these things override, like, doing what's actually the right thing. After confrontations with Ted, who is running for re-election with a tech-friendly campaign that would allow building a data center, Joe decides to run against him, much to the reclusive Louise's disapproval. And we do see, like, she does not accept this. Her mother does not accept this. They don't want that much prying into their personal lives. We do see the mother's feelings about this change by the end, but Louise is not here for it. This also implies that there's something Luis is trying to hide. Now, other officers at the station even ask him about his mayor run. They're going over a campaign slogans while there's like this kid that got arrested for being drunk in the drunk cell. You know, I'm talking a sober tank, whatever.
Honestly, low-key, not enough for you to put me in here.
He refused to take the field test.
Okay, campaign signs.
He's just like, I ain't going to say nothing. They're completely ignoring him. Like, okay, guys, what's our slogan going to be? We need it to really catch for the people. He's just like, please, I'll tell you everything. Let me out.
Look, I know I made a mistake, okay? I know what you guys are trying to do. I know what kind of cops you are.
He recruits officers Guy and Michael as campaign aides. And I really enjoy his relationship with the other police. We do see that completely fall apart and how they go after one another. That I don't like to see, but it does play into the absurdity of everything. We see Joe Cross's character's life essentially completely fall apart. We also see a conversation between the mayor and sheriff where they're out on a completely desolate street. No one is around, and within that, Joe and Ted, they're standing pretty far apart, and Joe Cross, who has been against mandates and whatnot so far, says,
Joe, 6 feet.
Ted Garcia is the one that steps on beyond that to get closer to him, to intimidate him. I just found it very interesting that the mayor backed off of the rules once no one was around to see. And even when the bar discussion at the very beginning was happening, we see how Ted Garcia was using, well, I'm the mayor, anything that I do is official government, blah, 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 was using that to justify the kind of meeting within the bar when Joe Cross, who doesn't even believe in the mandates, was saying, well, why are you even in there? And the mayor lists off reasons why the sheriff can't keep his office in line, and the sheriff has an excuse for each one, almost bordering on conspiracy theory. Just one that comes to mind is he said your last officer or whatever, was drug user essentially, and Joe's character was like, he accidentally interacted with some fentanyl. Just that lack of accountability, I think. But we can say the mayor does not have that as well, because we see how the mayor diverges talking points and shows how two-faced he really is.
He explained about the water and energy these data centers consume when we're in a historic drought.
We're always in a drought.
Can we not fucking shut this bitch up?
Stressed out over the sheriff, we learned that the mayor may or may not have dated sheriff's wife, Louise, and apparently got her pregnant. But this is all rumors that Ted, very, very quickly shuts down. So that's implying there's some guilt in this. Bashes her mom and her and sheriff. Then he gets slid a gift from the governor when he's meeting with his campaign manager. So it's like there's corruption on all fronts, either emotional or actually moral. There were a few times where I kind of saw myself being like, this movie is almost so absurd that it's confusing.
What do you think you're doing? He said I can borrow the car.
And maybe that's on me for trying to assign morality to it. I don't think this movie is trying to take a side on any of that, but it's just such an interesting conversation. We also start to get a interesting narrative around racial inequality. We see the youth really being heavily on that, whereas the police, who it's in question with, don't agree. They don't see where the criticism is coming from.
And the racial and economic inequities that COVID-19 only made worse.
Racial inequities?
And I thought one really interesting point was there's one scene where the kids are yelling in his face saying like,
Police violence?
you're a racist, you're terrible, you want to imprison black people. And he's just like, me?
No racist police! No justice! No peace!
And I found that to be a very interesting conversation of how, like, individuals within a system of oppression don't see the hand that they play into it. And I also, because I found myself questioning, like, are these protesters being made fun of in this film? I think some of them, yes. Some of them, it's shown they are highly, highly performative. Only saying certain things to get the attention of girls or a guy, stuff like that, But the only people that actually address their hypocrisy in this is the protesters. And I found that to be a really interesting thing. When she's screaming in his face, she's addressing her hypocrisy.
This is not my place! This is not my fight! I am a hypocrite!
As a white privileged person. And I just found that to be very, very interesting. That really kind of brought me back more towards the centered view that I think you need to have to watch this movie without getting too pissed off. There's also a scene where Louise comes back and she's having a conversation with Joe about him running for, And I think we saw a very certain side to Joe Cross's character, a desperate side.
I'm doing this for us, Rabbit. Did you know that this used to be a copper mine in town?
You need to be quiet.
But also a side that does not want to take no for an answer.
No problem. Just, yes, you, me, dinner tonight. Can we, please?
And we see how that really chips away at Louise.
Fine.
Yes?
Just go.
Louise and Dawn invite radical cult leader Vernon Jefferson Peake for dinner. And during a discussion about their conspiratorial beliefs about pedophilia and child trafficking, Louise hints that her father abused her.
This happens so much because there's this whole entire network. Okay, that's enough.
Now, it's much more vague. It's much more vague in the actual movie. You can just see that, like, it triggers her, essentially. She is deeply emotionally tied into that. So when the conversation comes up, it does kind of set her off. I also found Vernon's character to be highly interesting. And at the dinner with Vernon, his wife is late getting to dinner. They had decided, yeah, we'll do a dinner, fine. And then she shows up with Vernon. And Vernon is very validating of her art, but also her psychosis. And I think we're very wary of his character, but I don't know as though it's valid because he doesn't show us really any reason to think that he's bad other than, like, you know what it's leading to. It's basically like he's a cult leader. And at that dinner scene, it's also when we see that maybe her crazy theories are bred from, like, deep-rooted childhood trauma, as are the other spiritualists that Vernon brings with him. And it's later that night that Joe asks his wife, like, actually what happened. She doesn't say anything. This is the one moment where it seems like maybe he finally heard her in everything. Like, he didn't need to be told specifically. Finally kind of caught on. And it's just kind of poetically, like, too little too late. She falls asleep before he even gets the question out. Meanwhile, Ted's son, Eric, gets involved in Black Lives Matter protests with his friend Brian and social justice-minded Sarah.
About the Navajo Long Walk, what we did to them and the Apache, that's all the same.
Okay, you can always tell when somebody just learned something new in social studies.
Sarah unsuccessfully tries to persuade Michael to join their cause. And that's when we see, I guess, a different side that this movie takes. This was where I started to question, like... I would say just trust it. I don't think that the protesters are portrayed inherently badly. I think it's just the absurdity of everything. But see, I don't know. There's some conversations within this film that I think could be had. I don't know as though I'm the one to have them. It's an interesting movie. I also think the use of slurs in this movie, now hear me out, kind of works. It's nothing absolutely revolting. However, Joe Cross calls a kid on a bike the F slur.
Tell him about the time my dad dumped your wife.
Do I cut or?
And then there's a scene with, I believe it's Brian, his dad calls him the R slur.
Dismantling whiteness and not allowing whiteness to reassert itself. Are you fucking... You're white.
And they just come out of nowhere. So it's like you don't have a moment to really react to it. It just kind of hits you over the head. And I think when you go into this movie with the absurdist mindset, they're kind of funny. I know that's terrible. I know. I don't condone using slurs even in movies. It just felt real. I don't know. It only happened twice, I believe. That's the only moments where it really stuck out to me. So, I don't know. I'm not going to tell anyone how to feel about that. I thought with how it's delivered and how quickly and out of nowhere it comes, it oddly worked. To sway the election in his favor, Joe claims during a campaign event that Ted sexually assaulted Louise. Louise leaves town with Vernon after denying the allegations in an online video. And we find out that at the time Louise was 16, she denies it, though. Like I said, full out denies it. So I think that's more so confirmation. Joe ran off with the assumption that it was Ted, knowing that they had prior relationship stuff. I think it was Luis's dad. I mean, it kind of confirms that. I also found it interesting how Cross's character didn't use the information of his wife's trauma to try to help her. He only used it more so for his own political gain, which rightfully, of course, upset. Right. And I also found it interesting that the mother-in-law, this seems to be the only time that she kind of approves of Cross, is when he validates the suspicion she had that he would hurt her. And that feels so gross for a mother to feel towards her daughter's partner. But the mother-in-law also seems to take it personally against the daughter. And I think it's because the mother-in-law knows it was her husband. By Luis talking about that, saying that, making it a reality, even though it already was as Luis's, the mom takes as like a slight against her. I found that to be a very interesting kind of mental dynamic working between the mom and daughter. We also see Joe Cross's car just get crazier and crazier over time, like full on conspiracy float. The next day, Ted confronts Joe and slaps him in front of campaign fundraiser guests. This is a funny scene. I mean, Firework by Katy Perry is just blasting in the background. They're playing the video of his wife denying everything that he said. Like, it's just such a very, very interesting moment. And I think it's also the break of Cross's character, because this is where it very, very quickly slips into madness. We see how absolutely embarrassed he gets in front of everyone, even though I would say it's Ted's character that kind of crossed the line. Well, they both did, to be fair. We also see that the tree branch takes off like a decent amount of the smear campaign portion of his vehicle's like parade float. He just drives off, leaving it there. Like, this is defeat. But we're going to see him come back with a vengeance. That evening, Joe shoots a vagrant dead and dumps his body in a nearby river. This is the homeless man that we saw in the beginning. He breaks into the bar and he's just like ranting, drinking from every single bottle. And it's weird because Cross's character sits there not sits there. He's standing like in the doorway for a while, just watching it happen. And then when the guy eventually just randomly turns around, he instantly gets shot. He then shoots Ted and Eric in their home with a sniper rifle and stages the scene as an Antifa attack. Right? It gets so crazy so fast, you guys. I just thought like him going in to investigate, he is the one trying to pin it on these protesters. I found that to be very, very interesting. A political higher up figure creating violence and then pinning it on the people. But it dives deeper. I think Joe Cross is just a flawed character that got too tied up in everything. But we see how that then allows for much more powerful figures to come in and create even more chaos. We also see the reservation officers, they find shell casings and they are disputing whose land it's on because the house sits within Eddington, but where the shooter shot from was indigenous land. Well, it's all indigenous land, but you know what I mean. Also, I mean, it's obvious why the sheriff starts getting upset that the reservation officer is giving very valid information to him, and he's like, get out of here, get out of here. It's all information that's pointing to him. Within their investigation, they find the purse of the like protester girl, and they are questioning her. I found it very interesting that she says it's right-wing violence meant to institute martial law. I found that to be very, very interesting because we we see that happen. Meanwhile, a mysterious private jet carrying heavily armed extremists head toward Eddington. Joe frames Michael as the killer to divert attention, but Butterfly makes connections pointing to Joe. I also found it interesting them turning on the black cop, start pinning everything on him, even though like it made no sense for them to. And I think while we saw a bit of hypocrisy, I think in the beginning with the whole, well, none of that like racial violence stuff happens here. Well, we're kind of seeing it happen now because people are being put into a situation caused by those in power. Eddington is attacked by the extremists who kidnap Michael and set several fires. We see a very odd, almost Payman-esque statue on the top of one building that literally has white supremacy written on it. And then as Joe drives up a hill, we see that there is a burning cross in the middle of the road as well. And we only see this amplification once matters are pushed into that absurd realm. You know what I mean? Like things weren't going crazy before. But once an act of violence occurred, then it could be manipulated and used and amplified for political agendas. Joe and Guy find Michael in the desert where he tries to warn them not to get close. An explosive detonates when they approach, killing Guy and severely wounding Michael. After the explosion, we see like a bit of a gunfight happen, and Joe finds like a phone that just so coincidentally has like evidence linking Antifa to everything. Joe heads back to Eddington and finds himself targeted by armed extremists. And then he runs the entire way back into Eddington. Almost looks like the same pathway that we saw the homeless man take at the beginning. And he's just getting shot at left and right, evading bullets. And we think at first it's just by one person. And then we start seeing multiple people pop up from like different streets. There's also a scene in here where he goes to his house, and at first he thinks it's his wife who has returned to like get stuff, but then we see that it's actually his mother-in-law, and the whole time he's holding her at gunpoint. It's a little crazy. And he comes clean about killing Ted in that moment, just kind of rambling, and they again get shot at. The whole house gets shot up. I also thought it was interesting once he did get back into like the actual town of Eddington, he fell through a museum roof and into mostly indigenous exhibits. There has to be some symbolism in that. There has to be. After evading them in the desert and his home, he breaks into a gun store to arm himself. This is such a funny scene. It's such a funny scene. He comes out just like Rambo. He fires his weapons haphazardly, accidentally shooting Butterfly's leg off before the armed men delivered the finishing blow. There also was a point where it seemed like once the extremists, I guess that's what we want to call it, the extremists, once they saw Joe fighting back, it almost seemed like they weren't trying to kill him then. I think it was entirely all to stimulate fear. But at the same time, they were trying to scare the only white person in the situation, whereas the physical violence that actually occurred only happened to people of color. I find that interesting. And then we could think about that, how like these politically powerful people using fears of white people against minorities. I think maybe that could be what it gets into. But I also think that might be taking too much of a stance on this. This movie feels very centrist. And I feel like that starts to deviate. But I don't know. I'm open to the discussion. Joe is eventually cornered and stabbed in the head by an extremist, causing significant brain damage, but is ultimately saved by Brian, who guns down Joe's attacker while filming on his phone. He's on like TikTok live stream. We also see that the teen gets celebrated as a hero, like against terrorist attacks. And we kind of see how like he kind of becomes like a Kyle Rittenhouse figure. Starts doing like right-wing media and just kind of adding to the mess of the conversation. And we see that the mayor's Ted, the old mayor, his old campaign manager is now like Joe. It's not Joe, but it's his mother-in-law. She is now like a political figure, and she's the one ushering in this new huge data center, which she was totally against in the beginning, ranting and raving about all these conspiracy theories. So it's very interesting how she put those morals aside once money and power once again came into play. And she's still very much a conspiracy theorist, very much, but she uses her son-in-law as a token for her own gain because he's crippled. He can't even speak or, defend himself in that way. 1 year later, Brian has become a prominent conservative influencer, having capitalized on his filmed rescue of Joe from the extremists. Joe is now the mayor of Eddington. Okay, so he's still the mayor, but like he's not the one really in charge, There's still someone behind him kind of pulling the puppet strings, and I do think that's symbolic. Although he was mostly paralyzed during the attack, Dawn now serves as his caretaker and uses her position to speak on Joe's behalf, largely for her own gain. We also see Michael survived. He's covered in scars, but he did survive. And he's like zooming in, filming Joe as he sits in his chair at the inauguration of this new data center. And they move into the home where Ted was assassinated. I found that to be so interesting. Like living in a realm of your own terrible actions, he's reminded every single day, not just by the condition that he's in, but also by his actual environment. You walk into the room where you killed 2 people every single day. Well, he doesn't walk, but you know what I mean. We see him like getting slapped by the nurse that's helping him out of frustration. Like just this very sad, realistic look though at what Joe's life now is. After returning from the grand opening of the newly constructed data center, Joe and Dawn watch news coverage of Vernon and a pregnant Louise at a rally. Michael, who also survived and is now under sheriff, practices target shooting on the outskirts of town. I think that too is a commentary on how when people are used as pawns in a political scheme, that in and of itself breeds political extremism. Oppression in general breeds political extremism. But I found, like, while, yes, Dawn is extremely manipulative with Joe's character at the end, I also found it kind of endearing, their relationship. We see how much effort she does put into caring for him, and she even sleeps in the same bed with him and, like, says goodnight to him, treats him so much kinder than she did when Louise was there. So I don't know. I found their evolution to be really interesting. I don't feel like there was a resolution with Joe's character because I don't like what happened to him, but he also, made his choices and those came back to him. And maybe that was part of the political violence as well from the extremists to scare people back into submission because obviously something had happened. What Joe did. He's the one that assassinated the mayor and his son. No, he killed others too. But I find it interesting that a lot of the political violence fell onto the people that perpetuated it and minorities or vulnerable communities, being homeless people. I had to kind of stop myself a lot of the times from going too deep into this. It's an Astor film, so it's going to be dense. And it's like over 2.5 hours. So it's a long movie, but I do recommend it if you're open to the experience, I don't think this movie is for everyone. By no means. I think this movie also will make a lot of people upset, and you're valid. You're valid. If you don't like this kind of thing, that's totally fine. I'm choosing to believe that Aster was not choosing a side in all of this, but I think there is quotes on this that reality inherently leans left. And I think that that's kind of what naturally came about in this. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. We really kind of didn't see any actual political violence from the quote unquote left's side. It was all manipulated. And I don't think that mattered. Well, it matters that it's all manipulated. I don't think it matters what side it comes from, because either way, there were going to be these larger, more powerful figures that manipulate that and use that fear for their own control. I don't know, you guys. I feel like we're getting really, really into it. But yeah, I just found this movie to be fascinating. I really want to hear your guys' thoughts, what your interpretation of some of these scenes were. Some of them felt really crucial, and others I was left kind of questioning their reason. Because it's, like I said, it's an Aster film. Everything's there for a reason. But yeah, I want to know your thoughts, guys. I think this will open an interesting conversation. Hope everyone's having a great week. You know, we're going to be just kind of doing some random-ish movie reviews. Kind of want to get caught up on some of the newer stuff that's been released recently. But yeah, thank you so much, you guys. Hope everyone's having a wonderful day once again. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, like and subscribe, all of that. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Take care.